Hi, I am Adekunle K. Rufai. I am the poet, photographer, author, curator, youth worker, and creative expressionist that put together the Tribe exhibition. The Tribe concept, which stands for testing realities, invariably binding everyone. Well, the concept came about when I ventured out to Ethiopia to try and spend time with some very remote tribes who dwelt in the Rift Valley area of the southern regions of Ethiopia. And throughout my travels, going from village to village, I guess I realized how, on paper, all these individual tribes were very different to me in every sense of the word, from how aesthetically they looked, how they spoke, how they went about getting their food, all the things that kind of quote unquote define what livelihood means to me. Um, After spending these times with these tribes, I guess I realized that even though all these differences, which glaringly hit me in the face, were very evident to see, I started to see further than that. I started to realize that actually, as easy as it was for me to see how different we were, it became even easier to realize that actually those were just the barriers on the outside. Ultimately, we had the same things that bound us together. So they wanted to provide food for themselves and their kids and their family, which I want to do the same for myself. They ultimately expressed love and wanted to feel love within their community and within the people who they cared for, which ultimately is something that I have, and I'm sure you also do have in your own family setups. They wanted to provide shelter and protection for the people who they cared for, which ultimately was something I also had and shared with them. And it started to kind of dawn on me that all these things on the outside, which enable us to seem so different, which when we form our subgroups or religions or racial connections or our gender and everything else that creates difference, as important as those things are, sometimes it really clouds the way we see the human race and the way we interact with one another. So the concept of tribe came about through that whole journey and made me realize that ultimately, as much as difference is such a beautiful thing, it was also equally important for me to realize that there is a danger that could occur when we cling to what difference identifies within us, as opposed to seeing the whole world as one big human race, which we all are part of. Even though in our little subgroups, we identify as those, but ultimately we are one thing bigger than that, which is the human race. And ultimately, if we start to see the world as one big human race, we would have a bit more compassion for the way we interact with one another, the way we all live in different facets of our lives, and hopefully, move forward in this new age as one big human tribe of unity. That's kind of what brought about the concept of tribe.
When you think about what's happening in the world, on the one hand, it's shrinking. We see the internet and live feeds and YouTube, and that means that nobody around the world should be a stranger. And that should be bringing us closer together, because it should remind us that we're all fundamentally the same in terms of our aspirations, our hopes, our love for our children. But it's disorienting. And so a lot of people pull back into their own specific identities as their race, their tribe, their religion. And that's a dangerous thing, because it can splinter people and cause conflict. And people can decide that because this person doesn't worship the same God or doesn't look like me, then I don't have to have the same consideration for them. There are a whole host of ways in which that can lead then to conflict. And so one of the critical ingredients of any effort for peace is my ability to stand in your shoes, to see through your eyes, to constantly imagine what's it like being a mother in Bangladesh right now, and if the waters were rising because of climate change. That kind of ability to imagine ourselves in different situations helps us then connect with those other people, and hopefully that can be part of what drives us to want to do better on a whole host of things.
What I learned from going from village to village, which was very different from everything else I'd always known, was the fact that there were so many unique and innovative ways to live life, which, believe it or not, coming from the West was a shock to me, because I never thought anything else could beat what we have here in the almighty West, obviously. Technology was something that really, or devoiding of technology in its context, was something that really kind of struck me, as the fact that I always thought we relied on technology to be social, to communicate. But ultimately, spending this time with these various tribes, it really hit me that technology could pose a huge barrier between how we connect with one another on a human level. So all these tribes almost were totally unaware of what internet or any form of telecommunication meant. They merely communicated by verbal and body language. If someone wanted to send good wishes to another person, they would travel a couple of meters down to the next village just to say hi and just to say, you know, my father wishes you well. You know, simple things like that. Simple things like making eye contact and wishing you well, and giving handshakes and having communication. Not, most of the time, obviously, we didn't have the same language that bound us together, but ultimately the challenge was for me to connect with other people without using verbal languages. So that really struck me as something that, you know, transposing that back to the way that we live here, you know, jumping on the tube, and we all speak the same language most of the time, yet there's these barriers that we put up, which come in form of our evening standard, which obviously everybody wants one of those, and a great seat on the tube, and that's what we fixate ourselves on, and often tend to kind of forget the interaction, which kind of links and binds us all together as a human race. So sending a smile across to another person. So for me, going from village to village, it really reminded me of the fact that, you know, there's these basic things that bind us all together, but often we neglect that because we are in the bubble of the Western world, which sometimes alienates us from one another unknowingly. So that's something that really kind of struck me going from village to village. My biggest challenge, I would say, I mean, there were lots of them, but I'll say one of my biggest challenges would have to be, there was a particular tribe called the Mossy tribe. And before going into these villages of the Mossy tribe, I hired a guide to give me a very thorough breakdown, because prior to arriving at these villages, I had done my research, as every Western traveler would do, you know, type onto TripAdvisor, see what they recommend and what they don't recommend. And ultimately, there were lots of alarming messages about don't venture into the Mossy village. They would do this, and they would bully you, and they would charge you copious amounts for this, and they would often physically challenge you, and they're very aggressive, and stay clear, and all of this. And knowing who I am, that was more a reason for me to want to venture into that, to really kind of make the opinions and perceptions myself, irrespective of what everybody else said. So ultimately, before I went into every village, I hired a guide to really give me a thorough breakdown of what to expect, how to interact with the indigenous tribes, and how to be respectful while also trying to learn and have a cross-cultural relationship. So going into the village, spending time with the guide, he told me about, you know, how yes, these tribes are seemingly aggressive because they are bushmen, and they hunt and they kill because there's a form of hierarchy in their villages, which stem from being a man, which means, you know, you have to assert your superiority if somebody else challenges you. And obviously, because they were pastoralists, other tribes would often commune in a very favorable area where there's green pasture for all their cattle to graze on. And obviously, there's some who try to steal each other's cattle, and this obviously usually breaks out into an all-out war. And the man who comes out with the most bodies, i.e., most people he has killed, would be given as many scars as of many people he had killed. So having this background knowledge of this tribe and these men obviously was something that would make even the most boisterous and the most man-like man, shudder in his boots. And me being someone who is in the middle on the spectrum of how, boisterous and manly I would have called myself, I was quite, taken aback by this information. But I thought, nonetheless, let me come in here and experience this for myself. So he told me, when you go in there, you have a bit of muscle. So these men are quite slim. So seeing you aesthetically, they would potentially feel a bit challenged by you. So you need to be very careful in the mannerisms that you put across when you see these men, because if they feel incredibly threatened, then they might just challenge you. And more often than not, they would throw you a dunga stick, which is a fight to death weapon. And if you do catch this stick, then ultimately you have taken up the challenge, and this is a fight to death. So with all this, obviously, I was very, very relaxed hearing all this information. So true to form, when I got there, these things happened, and I was physically challenged. And these were the most, I guess, challenging moments for me, where I define myself as a pacifist. And I've always been able to say that because I grew up in a home where Christianity is something that I grew up understanding, that, you turn the other cheek when someone, slaps one of them, and you turn the other. And obviously I am a very big advocate of Martin Luther King and Gandhi and all these incredible pacifists. And I've always been able to model myself around that. And then coming into an environment where, aggression and, I guess, the opposite of pacifism was what was quite evident. It was something that struck me and challenged me to really redefine how I could call myself a pacifist based on my own context, and stepping into another world where, you had to prove your manliness, not necessarily because you're just someone who likes to kill, but because that's what the foundation of your community was based upon. So I asked myself the question, would I be able to define myself as a pacifist if I lived in a community where that was the context in which I was surrounded by? So that was, I guess, my biggest challenge, having to really dwell within a community where, it was not alien to see death, blood, killings, injuries, which result from just a certain manliness. And having to live there for a couple of days, long enough to really kind of get under the skin and understand that was something that was quite challenging, but equally quite eye-opening for me. So here, the Dorset tribe are a beautiful group of people who live high up in the Guja Mountains, and they are incredibly innovative people who, they are the most self-sufficient tribe I ever witnessed, in terms of creating every single thing they needed for their community to thrive. So they built homes out of unset false banana trees, which last for over 10,000 years, because they are built and they are portable structures. So the more termites start to eat them, they're built in such a high fashion that they start to shrink, and then they just move them from place to place. So I visited lots of homes that had 20 generations that have lived through the same home, something that, just incredibly blew my mind. And here what you witness is these women who basically, they create so many different things in their community, from pottery to cotton spinning to building infrastructure that lasts for years, and the gender roles blurred from women to children to men. It wasn't any specific roles that were so fixated on being a woman or being a man, and that really was something that was very interesting, and very alien for me to really experience, because there were women who were building homes and there were men who were spinning the cotton, and it was just really amazing to really witness that. And they did everything with a beautiful smile on their faces, and that was just such a breath of fresh air to experience. As you can see here, me coming into this village, which is a Mossy village, and you can see all these chattering of the women, and then ultimately what they were saying is, he looks like a man, but I don't see any scars in his arms. I don't know if we should allow him into our village because he looks like a man, but he's not quite one. And ultimately they weren't sure what to kind of make of me. So that was what we were seeing here. As you can see, it's mainly women in this village, and most of the men have gone out to take their cattle to greener pastures and try and feed them. So ultimately when they came back is when the physical challenges began. So prior to that happening is what you're seeing at the moment. Here what we witness is before the bull jump ceremony, the women from the Hammer tribe would, by the age of 18, would have to be part of the ceremony. So every male in their family, so be it their brother, their male cousin, their uncle or brother-in-law, or someone who is affiliated to them, after the age of 18, this male members have to perform a rite of passage where they have to jump over bulls. And before that could happen, these women have to go around to every male member of the community and taunt them with a whip and ask them to whip them as hard as they can, just to prove how much they really support and how much they love this male member of their family. I mean, I came back and I asked my sister, would you do that for me? She's like, I love you, but not that much. And that was something that obviously I'm sure she would if push came to shove, hopefully. And that was something that really opened my eyes to seeing the fact that, you know, we say love hurts. That's just a normal Western term. But never before has this concept of love hurting ever really reigned home such a visceral point for me to see women really exerting this, seeing blood all over their back, and they're going away from men to men saying, whip me harder, and they're dancing and they're singing, and you see blood just splashing off their back. And I'm standing there thinking, ouch, you know? But they were doing this all in the fact that they love their male member of their family, to say, you know, I believe he's going to accomplish this rite of passage. And in that light, I am exerting everything about myself to prove that hurting doesn't mean any much more to me than seeing the joy and success that's going to come out of this male member of my family accomplishing this rite of passage. So yeah, as alien as it was for me to see hurt and pain attached to something so beautiful, it was one I took away from this concept, to realize that, you know, it's easy to say things, but when you have to back it with, say, pain and blood, then that's when the true sacrifice really is evident. So yeah, what you are witnessing here is the beginning of the bull jump ceremony. So all the whipping that we spoke about and you saw earlier is all for this one moment. And as you can see, this guy is here, is trying to act like he's not overwhelmed by the whole experience. And I know if I was him, I would be, yeah, I would be shaking in my boots. Well, he's not wearing anything at the moment, so he's stark naked. But as you can witness, everything around him is incredibly jubilant. Everyone is dancing, singing. The women have ankle bells, and it's just so much noise and amazing kind of pandemonium all in one. And just like that, all that ceases and there's silence, and everything falls on the shoulders of this one man, and he has to perform this jump. There are these bulls lined up, and he has to jump over them 5 times without slipping. You can imagine how much pressure that is, for all the whipping and all the blood and everything that's happened prior to this from the women in his family, and for him not to be able to accomplish this, or for him to fall down in the 3rd or the 4th time. So I mean, I wouldn't want to be in his shoes at all. So just like that, as I mentioned, he jumps over 3, 4. The 4th time, was very close. He almost slipped. And then he went back again and did a fifth one, and he accomplished that. And just like that, everyone was jubilant, everyone was excited, everyone was happy. He finally earns the right to be able to pick out a lady who he obviously admires and would like to put, I don't know, 30, 40, 50 cattle towards getting her to be his wife. And he now has the right to be able to do that. And everyone is jubilant and going back to the village to celebrate and drink copious amounts of Tej, which is a local wine, which I'm a non-drinker myself, but I would say there is a strong pull for those who might have a affinity for anything that remotely tastes like good wine. So as I said, I don't drink it myself, so don't ask me how I know that, but it's something that everyone speaks very highly of, and that's what they all go back to indulge in and have great festive moments, days on end, just to celebrate this one person who has accomplished this bull jump. So yeah, it's quite a sight to behold, and hopefully you catch a bit of a glimpse of what to have experienced if you were opportune enough to have been able to witness the ceremony. After coming back from the experience in Ethiopia, I guess the concept of the tribe exhibition came to me, and I wrote the poem which accompanied the whole exhibition. And trying to create the visual for it, the strip it all visual. I think for me, what really was the most eye-opening thing for me in that concept was the fact that when I came back to England, it really hit me that while I was away, I stripped away most of the things that held me back unconsciously from really reconnecting to the human tribe. So what I wanted to recreate in the video, albeit metaphorically, was that we as human beings often adorn so many things which we do not realize that separates us from actually binding with the next person who you might see on paper and might be incredibly different from who we are or who you are. And once we start to strip those things away, we start to realize that we aren't that different. We all have the same binding things that create this huge cycle and circle of life, which is the human tribe. And ultimately what I wanted to recreate through that visual was predominantly showing that once we start to realize that we are one and we ultimately are bound by the same needs, then we just need to strip away every other thing that we create as barriers and differences for us to be able to unite and be one. So that's kind of what the concept of the Strip It All video arose from. The hashtag We Are One also kind of stemmed from that whole ethos and that whole idea that ultimately as human beings, we are one. You being a Filipino Christian with a fostered gay non-gender specific sister, ultimately on paper poses so many differences and so many reasons why we should never even have anything in common. But the challenge is to realize ultimately we are one. There's so many things that on paper make us different, but the more times we focus on that difference, the separatism prevails. And ultimately, the only thing that separatism provides is stereotypes, perceptions, and ultimately every kind of reaffirming of the society's box concept of you have to stay in this box, I have to stay in this box, and you stay in that box, and we would never coexist. And ultimately, the hashtag of We Are One is just something that kind of is to remind everyone that ultimately, as much as there are so many different and beautiful things that make us unique, which we should never ever try and forget, but bigger than that we are one big human tribe. And as long as we start to see each other as that, ultimately oneness would always prevail. And the only thing oneness could always bring and will always bring is love. And ultimately that's the idea of what the We Are One hashtag kind of stems from. So first question I want to ask you is, what does the concept of tribe mean to you?
I guess the concept of tribe means to me a common understanding, finding the commonalities between each other as opposed to the conventional focusing on the differences that we tend to do, rather than looking at someone subjectively, rather looking at them objectively as a person, as opposed to the different structures and perceptions we've created that we typically use to define a person. For me, tribe is like stripping all that away and just defining them by our internal factors and our belief systems and our mentality, and I guess more so our spirituality, how we connect as spiritual beings, as opposed to the physical aspects of us.
Thank you. So how is this relevant today, would you say?
I think it's more so relevant today because on two folds. On one scale, there's so much separatism caused by this constant indulgence in like, you believe this, so me and you are different. You look like this, so me and you are different. I'm from here, so I have to adhere to this as opposed to what I believe in. And then it's more applicable today because the world is so connected. It's so connected in a way that people are given the opportunities to be who they are. And I think if we neglect that, that makes us ignorant. You know what I mean? There was more of an excuse before when you could interpret someone having a set standard of beliefs because you couldn't access what they believe. You could say, oh, they're from this part of the world, maybe they're Muslim, so they believe this. But now there's so much available online. There's so much different perspectives that it only makes you ignorant not to acknowledge that not everybody's the same, and you can't categorize and group people into these boxes or classifications so offhandedly and make your opinions based on them. So I think more so today is very, very important that we understand the collective unity between all of us.
Being a spoken word artist and obviously a overall enthusiast of the art, how do you feel about the role art has to play towards kind of re-centering what the focus of humanity is at this moment?
I think true art has always played a fundamental part in the shaping of any society because art is unrestricted, art is unadulterated, and art is honest. I think for art to be really appreciated, it has to be honest. And if you look past the realities that people are trying to force on us, art shows the true reality. And once you immerse yourself in that reality, you start to look past the typical understandings of stuff. You start to look past the typical boundaries that are put between people, and you just communicate on a complete level of understanding and appreciating the creativity. So I think art is important because that's where you really find the truth. Like in art, in a lot of art, you're not criminalized or chastised for telling the truth. You know what I mean? It may not be appreciated, but you're allowed to do it. You know what I mean? And I think art is where we've always found a way to tell stories that are not filtered by mainstream channels or are not kind of like inhibited by certain platforms and their bias and stuff like that. So I think art is definitely always going to be the catalyst. I put it the example of someone may have a stereotypical view of black boys from London, you know what I mean? But then they may listen to Skepta or JME and be like, I like their music. So automatically they've opened their understanding towards that culture in a way they may not have been, or they made in a way that Crime Watch or Newsnight doesn't allow them to. So I think art is always going to be part of every society and going to contribute towards the catalyst towards changing people's mindsets and allowing us to connect even further.
Thank you very much. Danny, any last words that you wanted to just kind of add to it or say to anyone?
I just want to say that, through I think it's beautiful the way the world is right now. I think it's so beautiful that we can get opinions from other side of the world and take them in, and we can connect with people on other sides of the world. I just met someone who I met on Twitter, and although we come from completely different environments, we found something that we connect on, you know what I mean? And we've able to spend 2-3 hours together simply because we're allowed to access each other and we're giving each other the opportunity. We're not just looking at each other and be like, he's from a different part of the world, he's from a different background, I would never be able to relate to him. So I think it's a beautiful direction the world is heading into.